Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to the What Happens Next podcast, the podcast designed to, if you're thinking about the next chapter of your life, what you should consider and how to manage the transition when we reach crossroads in our lives. Now, I've been fortunate enough on this podcast to share some amazing insights, and I'm really lucky today to have a brilliant guest who's had a really fascinating life, and I'm sure has got a bunch of insight she can share to help you navigate your next chapter. Judy, how are you?
How am I? I'm really pleased to be here, Chris, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I really am. Let's start with a really open question. And I know all about you, but for the benefit of my audience, tell us a little bit about you.
So my name is Judy Piatkus, and I am in the latter part of my life. I have had a very interesting life. I was very lucky that I was able to develop and build my own publishing company. I'm actually an entrepreneur at heart, and I run Piatkus Books for 28 years, and we were pioneers in the area of personal growth. We were publishing books on mindfulness before the British public knew very much about what it meant and how it could help people. And we were publishing books about astrology and feng shui and business books. And we were also known for popular fiction. I ran the company for 28 years, and then I made a successful exit. And since then, I've had a wonderful time.
Amazing. And tell me how you got into publishing. How did that start?
Well, as a young woman and a daughter, my parents were fairly Victorian. They were very focused on my earning a living. And it wasn't important to them that I went to university. So they didn't especially encourage me, although I went to a very good school. So when I didn't get good enough grades, they weren't that terrible, but they certainly weren't as high as were needed. I became a secretary, subsequently a PA, and I always wanted to work with books. So I always worked in publishing. When I was in my early 20s, I met a young man of the same age, and we were both ambitious. And we went into business together, publishing reprints of books that had been out of print a long time and selling them to libraries. So we were publishing popular novelists whose work had either become very successful, and we were publishing early books that were out of print, or we were publishing novelists who died a long time ago. Sure. And this company was very successful for a while, but as we grew more successful, my partner and I had different ways of thinking about how we progressed it. And we decided one day that we couldn't work together anymore. And I walked off with £50,000, which was my share of the business, and quite a lot of money in those days. Yeah. And I started Piatkus Books on my own. And I had that company for 28 years.
You know what's interesting? You're talking about setting up Piatkus Books and having a big business prior to that, when probably entrepreneurship wasn't as popular a phrase as it is today, right? So what did mum and dad say about that, and what did they think about you setting up your own thing?
Well, my parents really struggled. I think they really struggled with it, actually. Yeah. I think my father had probably wanted a son. My father was Well, he got two daughters, and I think he'd have liked one of them to be a boy. I mean, he was a loving, kind man, but he and I didn't really have a close relationship,
Okay.
and I wasn't terribly close to my mother. And I think my parents came from families where education was very important.
Sure.
My uncle had gone to Oxford, my mother's brother, and her two sisters had both gone to university. And this was in the 1940s that they'd gone to university, when it was very unusual for women.
Yeah.
But my parents really just wanted me to be able to earn my own living, because that was paramount to my father. And they didn't really expect me to achieve a lot in the world, because in the 1950s and 1960s, when I was growing up, there weren't very many women who were
Yeah,
in
the culture is
business.
different, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
interesting.
my father really struggled, because he was the managing director of a building company, but he didn't own the company. And my father struggled, I think, because I was doing things that he would not have had the courage to do.
Yeah.
And my mother struggled because she was hoping I'd be the kind of daughter who was at home all day, and she could come over and look after the grandchildren, and we would go shopping together.
Yeah.
So they found I was a bit like a cuckoo in the nest.
You know what's really interesting? So I'm a dad of two daughters, Judy, and that is so fascinating for me. And I'm sure you see it with your kids, how different they are. So Charlotte, my oldest daughter, is very academic, super smart, at uni at the minute, 21. My youngest daughter is smart, super smart, but in a fundamentally different way. So she's arty, she's creative, but she's got these social skills that actually we underestimate when we think about life lessons, don't we? I think sometimes we think about that academic route I think it's changed over time, but even now we think about that academic route as the most important thing we can learn. But there's other skills that are fundamentally important in our own success in terms of life and business. So I'm curious, what skills do you think have really helped you in your life and business throughout the time?
I think it's helpful that I'm a balanced person, and
Yeah,
I've got a fairly even temperament.
yeah,
So I would come in the office every day, and I'd be pretty much the same every day. So
yeah,
I think that's really helpful for everybody who's working with you. I
yeah.
think it's hard to work for a boss, and you're never quite sure what mood they're going to be in when they get in the office.
Yeah.
And I have qualities of persistence and tenacity. And after I'd sold my company, I went to a talk once, and I discovered, and this was really interesting, that I was both left-brained and right-brained. So
Interesting.
the fact that I was able to be practical and pragmatic, but also to be creative, has turned out to be the most wonderful gift.
I
But
love
as I
that.
say, I discovered this after I sold the company. So
Yeah,
if you have a company and you're either one or the other, then you are going to need people around you who've got those other characteristics. So if, for example, you're really strong on finance, then you're going to need the creative people around you, and you're going to have to find people you trust. And if you're the creative person, you have got to work with someone who you trust when they say the numbers are just not going to work on this project.
yeah.
But luckily, I was both.
You had
And
both
so I
skills.
think that was really helpful for me and for everybody in the company, because it meant that I understood what everybody was doing.
But you make some really important points, because in business and in life, that emotional resilience, that ability to stay calm when things aren't going in a completely straight line. I've found, and I've seen this in my clients, that actually not panicking and just looking at what's the next action we take is probably the way to go, as opposed to the people who do get too emotional then make knee-jerk reactions and often make mistakes. That like calmness under pressure is definitely a skill I think is worth it. But I suppose you, throughout your sort of career with Piatkus Books, one other thing is you learn a lot as a business owner, don't you? So what lessons did you learn as a business owner and running that particular business do you think you learned but still apply to your life today?
I think every business is all about the people. And it's all about the people both inside the business and outside the business.
Yeah.
So I also felt, so when I had my first company with my partner, I ended up being very unhappy in the last year or so when we were working together.
Mm.
And I thought, when I start my own company, or when I decided to start again on my own, I thought I want to enjoy coming to work.
Yeah.
And I want everybody in the office to enjoy coming to work. And it shouldn't be something that they get up in the morning and think, oh God, I've got to work.
100%.
So it wasn't that I behaved like Google and had table tennis tables and fizzy drinks.
Why not?
That was ahead of our time. Yeah. But I did say to people, we want you to come to work, and we want you to work really hard between 9 and 5, and then we want you to go home and have a life. So we're not going to be calling you at all hours of the day. Not that people did that in the 90s, because people didn't have mobile phones. But we want you to really enjoy it and have a good time. And we wanted everybody to be kind to each other. We wanted everybody to work as a team. And of course we had to make a profit, but we would have regular monthly meetings, and I would tell everybody how we were doing. Yeah. And I would say to them, look, we have to make a profit, because otherwise you're not going to be paid at the end of the month. Yeah. And it's very interesting because younger people, I think they're a bit more savvy nowadays, but many years ago, people came to work and they got a job and they didn't really think about themselves in relation to the whole. But at Piatkus, we were very focused on people understanding how everybody was making a contribution that was really important.
Well, I think it's interesting in terms of when I'm doing the research for the What Happens Next book that's coming out in 2026, and people who have had careers and retire or think about what happens next in their lives. And I've had clients, Judy, who find themselves saying, right, I've sold my business, I'm going to retire, I'm going to stop. And then finding that the bit that's missing is purpose. So what am I doing now that gets me up in the morning, that's of value to the world, that I can contribute? And often, I speak with friends of mine who go to, and it really confuses me, because they go to work and go, I don't know whether what I'm doing is adding value. And I go, this is a really important element of your well-being, to do something you think helps people. And being, when you're part of an organisation, I think understanding where you fit as part of that mix is really important. Do you think culture's changed that over time? Do you think we're better at understanding what role purpose plays in our lives?
Well, as I think I can fairly say that Piatkus Books was a pioneer in publishing business books in the 90s and after that, which were for everybody, because early in the 90s, most business books, there weren't that many business courses, and most business books were published for people who were academic or studying how business worked. Yeah. And of course, it has become much more complicated since technology. But when it comes to purpose, I think younger people are expected to know what their purpose is, or to be looking for their purpose at much too young an age. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, the topic was not on the table. Nobody talked about purpose. And I think it's too early to be thinking about your purpose in life. And there's a wonderful talk that you can listen to and it's Steve Jobs giving the commencement address at Stanford University.
Seen
And
that one. Incredible.
you've heard it. So as he talks about doing what he loved, doing calligraphy. He dropped out and he studied calligraphy. He dropped out of what he started at university to do, and he thought he'd like to study calligraphy. And because of that, it led to his interest in fonts and design. And we all know that Apple is very clear in its design.
Yeah.
So I think when people are in their 20s and 30s, insofar as they can afford to do so, they should be experimenting with what they actually enjoy doing.
What do you love? Yeah. No, that's really interesting. How about
and I do want to add, Chris, if you're not sure what you enjoy doing, think back to what you loved doing as a child.
Yeah.
And sometimes people remember, like, I liked building Lego, or I liked reading in my particular case, or I was really interested in being in the garden. I like being around nature and growing flowers. And here's another tip, if you're not sure what you really love, when you go into an airport or a large branch of a shop that has loads of magazines, what magazines are you drawn to? Because that will give you clues.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. What did you love doing as a kid? Do you know what I mean? When it was only play, when it was just play, what did you love doing? You know, you mentioned about younger people not actually, there's no need for younger people to look at purpose. Do you think it changes as we get older?
Well, as we get older, we began to see how the threads of our lives link together. And so in my case, nobody talked about purpose when I was younger. And when I started my company, if you had asked me, I would have said, well, my purpose in life is to sell as many books as I can.
Yeah.
Like, straightforward.
How about now?
Yeah, and we were very clear about our mission statement, because in the 90s it was all about mission statements. So our mission statement was to entertain, to inspire, and to inform.
Yeah.
But as I grew older, I realized, because of the nature of the books we were publishing in the area of personal development, I realized that my purpose in life was to open people's minds to new ideas. And after I sold my company, I did a certain amount of speaking about how to create a successful exit when you're ready to leave your company. And then I did various other things, but everything about me is about opening people's minds to new ideas. And I realized that's actually been my purpose throughout my whole life, whether publishing, speaking, or having a chat with you.
That's so interesting, because actually you found your purpose. You could, the phrase that I love that you use, Judy, is connecting the threads. And sometimes you've got to just do stuff to connect the threads retrospectively, right? You've got to try things out. But one of the things I was fascinated about when I was reading your story is the fact that you were trying brand new things in publishing decades ago. And I'm really curious when I speak to clients and they're making big changes in their lives, they're selling their business, or they are deciding to stop a career they've done for 30 years. I'm really curious when I was reading your story about how you perceive risk, how you perceive trying out new things, and has that perception of risk and trying out new things changed over time?
I am always up for trying out new things. I don't
What's the last thing you tried out?
That will never change.
No, I'm the same. What's the last thing you tried out that was new?
Well, I travel to new places. So
brilliant.
I love travel. And so I guess that's the most adventurous that I'm being at the moment.
So tell me about your last trip. Where did you go?
My last trip, my last trip was the Cotswolds in Oxford, but my trip before that, the big trip of this year, was to the Far East, when we went to Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and Cambodia. And in Cambodia, we were just wandering over all these ancient temples.
Yeah.
And that gave me such a high that I was still able to travel the world and just see these amazing places and enjoy it so much.
Love that. And where's next? Where's next?
Where's next? Well, we'd love to go to, when I say we, I'm talking about my husband and myself.
Sure.
We'd love to go to South America. We hope we might be able to go next spring. And I haven't been to the countries we're planning to go to, Argentina, Chile, maybe Bolivia, Uruguay. I haven't been there at all. And that will be I've been to Brazil, but that will be a totally new culture for the most part. And we'll be doing exciting new things. And I hope I can carry on as long as possible, which is, of course, about staying healthy and fit.
And that's part of the mix, isn't it? Part of the mix is that physical well-being that allows you to do these new things. So what's fascinating to me is that attitude throughout your life of just trying out new stuff. Has that how you see risk changed, or are you the same now as you've always been, do you think?
When I was a teenager, I was always up for exploring new stuff, but I was never very physically adventurous.
Okay.
So very often it's exploring places, and I'm going there physically, but I'm exploring it with my mind and my senses. But I'm not someone who ever wanted to go bungee jumping or horse riding or driving fast cars. And I don't explore technology. It's not a gift that I have. So, we're all interested to explore something. Actually, all of us are drawn to explore something. And sometimes the challenge is to just find what it is. And I think you have to be patient, but you also have to be ready to recognize the opportunity. So I was chatting with a friend about, this was about 12 years ago. And I said, what are you doing now? And he said, oh, I'm just about to do a degree. And I said, oh, what's the topic? And he said, it's in leadership. And he was telling me about it. And I thought, that sounds interesting. And I have never been to university, as I mentioned before. And I said, do you think they'd let me come on this course? Because it was a master's. And lo and behold, although I hadn't been to university before, because it was a degree in leadership, and because I'd done all the basic spade work of being a leader,
Sure.
I went to university and I spent 18 months learning how to write essays, because I hadn't written any essays since I was 15. That was the most challenging part of it. So there's always something to learn.
Yeah, and it's that. I mean, like the psychologists call it growth mindset, don't they? The opportunity to just continue to develop and evolve throughout your life. And it's certainly something that we talk to our clients about in terms of saying this chapter of your life with the right mindset is a real opportunity to do the stuff that you've never done before and try out new things. I love that. Now, this podcast, Judy, is called What Happens Next, because it's designed to help people who are approaching a transition point in their life think about what happens next and the things that they could potentially do. And you've gone through a bunch of your own What Happens Next moments, from selling the business to opening the Conscious Cafe to becoming a psychologist, a psychotherapist, to becoming a coach, to run a non-profit, and as mum. What have you learned through all of those changes, and what helped you decide what was next when everything was in a state of flux and changing?
I think the most important thing is to be patient, because the answers don't come when you expect them to come. So answers often come when our minds are fairly empty. We might be going for a walk, or you might be just sitting in the park, staring at the trees. And I think the most important thing about deciding what comes next is is to be patient. You can't sit there and say, right, what comes next, and expect the answer to immediately come.
Yeah.
So be patient, and then trust your intuition, trust your instincts. So if an idea comes for you and you think, oh, that sounds good, don't immediately look for all the reasons why you couldn't do it. So if your heart gives a little leap and you think, oh, that sounds fun, don't give yourself a hard time. Instead of thinking why you can't do it, think, well, how can I make that happen for me? So if it doesn't seem that practical because of your age or because of your financial circumstances, nevertheless, there might be a way of doing it. Just sit with the idea for a while, and you can sometimes make up your mind and set your intention. That's really important. I'm going to achieve that. What are the steps that I need to take? Or how can I do this in a way that will work for my life now and for the people who surround me? Because if you've got a family or other people that you have to take into consideration, then you've got a problem and you're going to have to find a way to solve it. And because I'm an entrepreneur, I like solving problems. If you don't like solving problems, definitely don't run your own company. But if you have been running your own company, you're used to solving problems and you're going to be able to solve the problems. So sometimes somebody rings up with an opportunity, or you see something online and you think, well, that'd be lovely. And you've got to pay attention to it. And don't think it's just for other people. I mean, you've got to think, well, why couldn't I do that?
Well, I love the point you make about asking yourself, instead of shutting it down, just ask yourself how, and then take the steps. I think that's so important. And help me understand. Give me an example of when you've done that in your life. When you've thought, I really want to do that, and then you've gone, right, how do I get there?
I think the answer, so I've got a couple of examples. The first was the university one. I mean, my friend called me, told me about the subject. He sent me the prospectus. I read it. I thought, I want to do that. And I filled in the application form.
Love that.
And they accepted me.
Love
I
that.
mean, it was just like, I immediately thought, this is my chance to go to university and study something that I'm interested in, which is leadership. And if you'd asked me if you'd said to me the week before, you're going to go to university and do a degree, I was in my early 60s at the time, I'd have thought, that is ridiculous.
Love that.
That's crazy.
You know what I'm curious about, though? Like, because you'd been a leader throughout your life, what did you learn about leadership from that experience?
Well, leadership is accepting that it's not a comfortable place to be. And I actually learned this at university. And I learned it because we had a lecture on 4 philosophers, and one of them was Nietzsche. And I think this is what I took away the most important from university, which is a leader stands apart from the herd. And that's why it's an uncomfortable place to be, because you have to put yourself out there and you have to hope people are going to follow you. It's hard to be a leader without any followers. So, you know, all of us can think about it. We're all so familiar with followers on social media. But what is a follower really when you're building an organization, when you're building a company, when you've got a project, when you want to sort of you might want to create a charity, or you might just want to do a project that raises money on a single occasion for some charity that you care about. So anything. So why are people going to follow you? And so that's really interesting, because being a leader is not a comfortable place to be, and you're not part of the herd. So I found that probably the biggest learning that I took away from university. So when I started Conscious Cafe, so Conscious Cafe is an organization that I run, and it brings people together for thoughtful conversation. And I'd been wanting to do this for a while because I was missing having the thoughtful conversations that I have with authors and that I have with people in my company. And I wanted to talk about the mystic world because I was very intrigued by that. And it got to the point where I had no project in front of me. There was nothing on my desk, on my home desk, after I'd sold the company. It was about 18 it was 2 years after it was 2011 I started it. So it was actually 3 years after I'd not had the company, and it had been in the back of my mind. And I thought, well, who am I to start something? But I sent out invitations to people, and I said, please come to my home and we'll have a talk about what is consciousness. That was the topic of the talk. And I was really anxious. I thought, who am I to lead an organization, to lead a group, to even set up an evening and invite people to do this?
Even though you run,
anxious making.
Sorry, Judy. Even though you'd run the business, that was still. I suppose every time we do something new, we go through that anxiousness, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was really anxious because I thought everybody might come. They might not get on with each other. There might not be anything to talk about. Consciousness is a tricky subject. But 25 people came. Amazing. And they loved talking to each other in groups. I spoke to a friend and said, how shall I organize the event? And I said to them at the end, shall I do this again? And they said, oh, yes, please. And I began to do it every month. And virtually every month since June 2011, I have run some kind of event for Conscious Cafe. And we now have 14 groups in different places, several in the UK, live groups, and some abroad. And we offer an online event every month. And we have presenters talking about different topics. Sometimes they're very, very mystical, and sometimes they're more down to earth. So the down to earth ones might be about health or environment, and the mystical ones might be about astrology or some other interesting aspect of the mystical world.
Interesting. And I think what's fascinating when we've spoken before, and what I've learned during this interview, is you've got this ability to shift from, even though everything you're doing is connected and it's about trying new ideas and thinking from new perspectives, you've got this real talent of shifting from identity to identity, publisher, entrepreneur, coach, psychotherapist, mum. How, because I have a lot of conversations with clients who struggle with this. And I had a conversation with a client very recently where they're an MD of a fairly big business. They weren't enjoying the work anymore, and they decided to stop work. And this was like 3 years down the road. He still hadn't stopped work. And when I asked him, look, we've worked out the money. We know that financially you're going to be fine. What is it that's stopping you taking the next step and moving into the next chapter of your life? Judy looked me dead in the eye and said, what am I if I'm not that? And he was really struggling with this shift in identity. And interestingly, he was going through another challenge, that he was dad and then the kids are growing up. So that identity was shifting for him as well, because the relationship was changing. How do you navigate that change in identity, particularly in our 50s, 60s and beyond, when things start changing?
It's harder for men. I definitely think it's harder for men.
So. Yeah, I think so.
And also it's harder for the people who are more introvert. So the extroverts are going to go out and they're going to network and they're going to meet up with friends, and the opportunities are going to come more easily because you're having the conversations.
Yeah.
And the introverts definitely find that harder. And very often you've got an extrovert married to an introvert. So,
yeah.
And it's
in your marriage, who's the extrovert and who's the introvert?
Now, if you met my husband, you'd think he was the extrovert, but actually, of course, it's me. So if you met him, he's very chatty, very friendly, very sociable, but he doesn't need to be around other people.
Yeah, he's
the same way that I do.
Places. Yeah.
So that's the challenge for more men, because in a relationship, more men are often the introvert, not always. And I knew this was going to be an issue for me, because I had been able to say I was a publisher for the whole of my working life. And I began to prepare emotionally for it. It did help that we published books on the topic, personal development. So I began to prepare emotionally for it. I thought, once I've sold the company, I will no longer be able to say I'm a publisher. So who am I?
Who am I? Yeah.
And actually, I had 2 or 3 things that I was interested in. And I did have another little company, which was doing something slightly different. I was fairly passive in it. And I decided I would say I have a portfolio career. So when I was networking or meeting people socially, I would say I have a portfolio career. So that is a totally meaningless phrase. But it
could mean anything, couldn't it? Yeah.
So most people are not that interested to inquire further. But every now and again, people would say, well, that sounds interesting. And then I would say, well, I do a little bit of speaking, and I've got a little company, and then after 3 years, Conscious Cafe came along. So I think if you're planning to do this, you have to start preparing yourself emotionally. And if you're really struggling with it, I would suggest that you get a coach, possibly someone like you, Chris. To be perfectly honest, it's really hard to do it on your own, because what happened was, apart from my degree, I had been running my publishing company for many years, and I became interested in doing a bit of volunteering on a helpline, a bit like the Samaritans, although it wasn't the Samaritans. And this was in the 90s, when you went home from work and you didn't have email, you didn't have computers, you actually switched off. So I did some volunteering work, and then I did some work as a bereavement counsellor. And then I thought, I could be much better at this if I actually did a counselling course. So I did a counselling course. This was in the evenings in my late 40s. And I loved it so much that I went on to do a diploma in psychodynamic psychotherapy. And I was doing it from 2 o'clock to 9 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. And I said to my colleagues, look, I know this is a bit weird, but if I said to you, I'm going to play golf, it would not be totally weird. So just think of me as playing golf.
Yeah, I'm not in the office.
People were still doing that then, but I happened to just be nipping off to college. So what I learned during my period of training to be a psychotherapist, you have to go into therapy yourself. I'd never been in therapy. And when you're in therapy, you actually learn a lot about yourself. And you actually can't do it on your own. You have to do it with someone else. So that developed my self-awareness. And I think when people are moving from one massive phase, especially if you're a man and this has been your career and this has been your whole life and it's occupied all your thoughts, except when you were thinking about family, friends and relationships, then it's good to become self-aware and to understand yourself better, because when you understand yourself better, you have the route to peace of mind. And when you've got the route to peace of mind, you can enjoy life more.
What I'm really curious about is how long that journey took for you. So if somebody was thinking about, okay, well, I think I need to go through this transition. I feel like I'm approaching a crossroads, but I'm concerned about this identity shift. How long did it take?
You can't put a time on it. And I would say it's about how willing you are to do the emotional work. And the emotional work is you thinking about your family, where you came from, the values, what's important to you, what's not important to you, your strengths, your weaknesses. And then in that way, you begin to get more of a sense of who you are, who you are as a person, what your identity is, as a leader, or as a parent, or as a son, or as a brother, or as a brother-in-law, perhaps, as a neighbor. There are so many areas where we have an identity, and we don't always recognize the skills and the gifts that we bring to the people who surround us in those different relationships.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point. As we're doing, I'm a financial planner, I'm a business owner, but what's interesting as we start to build the What Happens Next project and talk more broadly about things like purpose and meaning and identity, I've needed some coaching to help me grow into that role, because it's a different role to just thinking about and talking about the money. And it's been such an insightful process, and something that I've got a lot out of. Actually, I've really enjoyed it, and I think sometimes you're right. I talk about it like the mirror. Sometimes you need somebody else to hold that mirror up and ask the uncomfortable questions you've probably been ignoring for way too long. And I'm getting a lot out of it. But yeah, it's interesting. What I love as well is the fact that after you left, you then after you sold the business, set up Conscious Cafe, you then wrote your own life story. And there's plenty more to come, but you wrote your own life story up to that point in ahead of her time. And I think, for me anyway, writing is quite a cathartic experience. I learned a lot when I write. What did you find you learned through the experience of writing your own story?
It was fascinating writing my own story. And so, of course, in asking that question, Chris, you have to remember that I was a publisher. So I'm not a great writer. I've got a fairly limited vocabulary. I mean, I didn't have a degree, and I ran a publishing company, and it was a very successful one, but we weren't publishing literary fiction or nonfiction. So when I began to write my book, I actually wrote a book. I've actually done lots of things. I just want to mention I've done loads of things in my life that I've experimented with and haven't worked. Like I didn't love yoga, I didn't love learning French. I've tried things and didn't enjoy them and gave them up, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, it's just not for you. So I did write a book after I sold my company, and it was too soon. And I sent it to a couple of literary agents, and they couldn't see how they could do anything with it. So having been a publisher and sending it to literary agents and being rejected, that was quite a good lesson for me. And this book came. I'd actually met somebody who did what we used to call palmistry, although she now calls it scientific hand reading. And I met her at a lunch with a few people, and a friend of mine opened her hands, and this lady began to look at the hands and tell my friend things about herself that I knew were true. And I also knew they'd never met. So I asked her for a session, and she looked at my hands and she said, "You've got a message to give to the world, and you need to get on with it." And it felt like it was the book. And it felt like my story might be helpful to inspire and encourage other people to take chances and do things that were in their hearts, that were just wanting to be experimented with.
And you know what's interesting? I'm writing the What Happens Next book at the minute, but my last book was about kindness. And through I learned a lot about kindness through the podcast that I used to host with my daughter. And I love it. It's one of my favorite things when somebody writes to you, somebody emails you, somebody approaches you and says, that book and one of the ideas in that book helped me in some way. And it might be tiny, but actually just hearing that something you've communicated to the world has helped somebody else is quite a humbling thing to go through. That's what I found. What did you find about it?
What I found was interesting was understanding more about myself.
Yeah.
So when I began to write about my life and my company, and I have a daughter with disabilities, so I wrote about her too, because I think I particularly wrote the book, although men have enjoyed it. I wanted women to feel empowered when they read it, and that they could do something even though they had children with challenges. So when I was writing the book, it actually took over my life. And that was very interesting because I'd write something and then I'd wake up in the morning and a whole load of stuff that I didn't know was in my memory was sort of ready to be downloaded. And so it enabled me to make sense of why I'd taken particular decisions in my personal life, but also in the company. So I think that what I produced in the end offered more than I would have expected. But then after that, I learned my lesson from when my book was rejected by the literary agents the first time. And I went to a freelance editor who I respected, and I got her to review it and give me her opinion. And I took her advice.
Love that. We haven't even come on to that particular part of the subject of you being a mum and particularly a mum to a disabled child. How did you get the balance right, particularly when Piatkus Books was happening, between being mum, business owner, entrepreneur, publisher? What's your thoughts on balance, or is balance a fallacy, or how do you feel about that? And what did you learn about being a mum of somebody who needed additional care?
Well, if you had said to me before, I've got 3 children, and Sonia's my oldest, and she has cerebral palsy, and she has very, very severe disability. She's lived her whole life in a wheelchair. Now she's in a home. And if you just said, and I wasn't a woman, I wasn't a girl who played with dolls. I wasn't interested in the home. I wasn't interested in the more obvious feminine aspects of being a girl. And so as a teenager, if you'd said to me, you're going to become the mother of a disabled child, I would have said, I am completely unsuited to that role.
Yeah.
But when Sonia arrived, I loved her as parents love children.
Oh.
And so I just wanted to look after her and give her the best life I could. But at the same time, I knew that I was going to need money in order for us to live a life where we weren't struggling for extra care for Sonia all the time, because I didn't know that she would be able to go into such a good home. And she was actually offered a place there when she was 9, but I didn't know that would happen. And if you've got a child with disabilities, everything costs more because they need different things. They need, and you need help and support. You want to be able to go out for the evening and leave her at home with someone who you trust. So you've got to pay for that. Yeah. So I was very motivated to earn money for that. That was really motivating me to earn money and do well and have control over my life and have sufficient for all our needs as a family.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting because like you that element of, you know, money is, you want to support the people you love, you want the freedom, you want the elements. It's not the money in and of itself, it's what it can provide you in terms of helping the people you love. I want to quickly revisit Conscious Cafe, if you don't mind, Judy, and talk about what you've learned from the experience of running Conscious Cafe. You get a bunch of diverse people together, all with different sort of perceptions on the world and experiences. And I'm curious about what you've learned about life, identity, meaning, purpose, all of the important things from getting those people together on a regular basis.
Well, one of the things that I really gained from doing my psychodynamic psychotherapy course is an understanding of just what it means to be with people, and just to ask them about themselves and be interested in them. And if they tell you difficult things, I've sort of learned phrases to sort of respond. So that makes it easier to be in conversation with people you know. So what I've learned from Conscious Cafe, and I'm just going to quickly digress and tell you that I first started a group when I was a teenager with a friend. And it wasn't until I'd had Conscious Cafe a few years that I remembered that as a teenager, I'd started a group with a friend because we wanted to meet more boys.
I
So,
remember you
you
saying
know,
that.
so, you know, what you love to do as a child and a teenager, it's a pattern in your life, but you don't always see it till later.
I had a sorry, I'm really curious so much about Conscious Cafe, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine who locally to me, I now live in Leigh-on-Sea on the Essex coast, but locally to me, he's set up this business group where it's in a wine bar. We get together on a Friday, we have a few drinks, we support each other, and we talk about business. And I said to him, and I've got into paddle tennis quite recently, and I'm running a WhatsApp group now. It's got 30 people in, and we do like, I don't know, 10 games a week. And I said to him, there's something in Justin, who's my friend, and and you actually, Judy, that can't help getting people together. I feel compelled, like even when I turn around and go, I'm too busy to do it, I really enjoy what people get when they put communities together, and it sounds like you do too.
Yeah, it's something you're born with. You know, we're
Yeah.
born with all kinds of skills and talents, and sometimes it takes a while to recognize them. So what I've got from Conscious Cafe is an understanding of loads of different points of view, an
Yeah.
understanding of the way many people think. I hope I'm tolerant, and I hope I'm non-judgmental, and I am. When you've trained to be a therapist, and when you've done some coaching, when you've done some counseling, you become much more aware of your own thoughts.
Yeah.
So certainly if you just do a mindfulness course, so it's about recognizing when I am being judgmental, and having a look and thinking, why was I judgmental with that person, and sort of querying my own responses to things that people say. And I've also made some lovely friends, really lovely lifetime friends. And above all, I just feel really grateful, that I get to be with all these lovely people every now and again.
Love it.
We've got a separate community for the leaders of our different groups. And we had a retreat for our Conscious Cafe group leaders recently. And all the people who came, just such lovely people. I just feel so grateful. They're in my life and they're my colleagues. So I've had so much from Conscious Cafe, and just feel so grateful, because in the end, our lives are all about the relationships that we have with other people.
Of course. And there's a great book that we talk about quite a lot on What Happens Next, but by a guy called Bob Waldinger, his name is. It's called The Good Life. And Bob Waldinger is the guy who ran the Harvard study on social engagement. And it's an 80-year study where they've been looking at what happiness and well-being means over an 80-year period. And the first paragraph of this book talks about the fact that the biggest indicator of happiness was strength of relationships. How deep and how positive our relationships are. It's an amazing book. Like, you know, it was really, really insightful. But I think sometimes we lose that, you know, in pursuit of, you know, and we as you say, we've all got to earn money and build businesses and do all that sort of stuff, but often not focusing. And I do think my experience is that men struggle with this more than women. I think women are better on it, and I know that's a generalization, but that's what I see. Like, just understanding that social relationships are fundamentally important to our well-being is really important. Now, Judy, this podcast is designed to help people primarily in their 50s, 60s and beyond navigate what happens next in their life. And I'm after a top tip. So what tip would you recommend if people are thinking they want to make positive change to do today to help them work out what happens next?
Do you know what's coming into my head? Because I feel very strongly about this at the moment, because we are living in a very chaotic time on the planet. And it's very hard for so many people. And there's a lot of division, and there's a lot of intolerance, and there's a lot of hardship, and there's a lot of pain and violence. And I really feel that you've got to be grateful. You've got to be grateful for all the good things in your life. And if you make a list of what you've got that's working for you, what you're grateful for, all the good things that you've had in your life, and sometimes it's as basic, and we're living in the UK. Sometimes it is as basic as going to the tap, turning it on, and A, water comes out, and B, it's usually drinkable.
Yeah.
And so whoever you might be, have been born at a time when you had basic things that enabled you to get through life to this point. Clearly, you've managed it. And obviously, some things have worked. So make a note of what's worked, and think about why it's worked, and think about what skills and what talents you brought to that situation so that it worked for you. And then think what skills and talents that you've already got, what resilience you've got to this point, you're still here, you've got all that, and how are you going to enjoy yourself taking it forward?
I love that. And it's really interesting. I know that I'm lucky. I know that I've been fortunate. And it's when I have conversations with friends about this, they often say, you're not lucky, you worked hard. And I think that ignores the point that you're making, because actually we're fortunate. Even if we have put the work and effort in to build something, there's always an element of luck. And even if that luck, as you say, is you're born in a country where you can turn the tap on and get drinkable water, is a big win, isn't it? So where do you think for your life the balance of luck, skill, and the hard work sits?
That's quite a challenging question to end on, Chris.
It is a bit, Judy, isn't it? I didn't know I was going to answer that one.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I have to tell you that I don't know the answer without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so I have to say as well that in me not knowing the answer, it's just about, we don't always know the answers.
It's true.
And that's okay. And we don't have to know the answers.
It's true. And actually, that's what often makes life so exciting, because there's always more to learn, right?
Oh, there's always more to learn. And it's okay not to know the answers. And if more people said they didn't know the answers and asked
100%.
for help a bit more often, we'd have a happier world.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what you said about, judgment and decision often close down our minds to turning around and going, well, actually, I don't know. And your perspective might be interesting if I consider it. Judy, I've loved our conversation today. Tell us, for our listeners, where people can find out a little bit more about you.
Thank you. Well, I have a website, which is www.judypiatkus. That's JUDYPIATKUS. And Conscious Cafe is consciouscafe.org. So Conscious Cafe, CONSCIOUSCAFE, consciouscafe.org. There might be a group near you. Our nearest group to you, Chris, is way up the coast in Great Yarmouth, but it's run by a lovely guy called John, if you're ever in Great Yarmouth.
Oh, perfect.
And and you can find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on.